somewhere out just outside of, or very, well, not outside, but very close to or in on the outskirts of Boise, I picked up a young woman who was hitchhiking.
I'm Sheriff Matt Clifford, and you're listening to the Ada County Sheriff Cold Case Files. In this episode, Deputy Montag and cold case investigator Detective Cooper will be discussing an investigation involving one of Ted Bundy's victims who has yet to be identified. We hope that by getting this information out, we're able to identify the Snake River Jane Doe and bring her family closure. This podcast contains mention of murder and sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised.
I'm Deputy Lauren Montag with the Ada County Sheriff's Office, and today I am sitting down and talking to cold case investigator Detective Tim Cooper. Tim, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, I work for the Ada County Sheriff's Office out on I-84 as a canine deputy, and I also handle our office's cold cases, so I do quite a bit of investigation on those, including the investigation we're going to be talking about today.
So, in regard to today's investigation, which does involve a Ted Bundy victim, can you talk to us a little bit more about how this investigation, how this victim came to your attention?
Yeah, so over the last 9 years or so that I've been working out on the interstate, I've had occasion to stop off at our local truck stops. I've, of course, contacted a large number of truck drivers in my duties. And it has come up on more than one occasion that we may have had a Jane Doe abducted from our jurisdiction back in the early 70s. Sometimes truck drivers will ask me about Ted Bundy and if I know anything about the abduction and so forth. And once that started happening, and it happened a couple of times, I started researching it a little bit more so that I'd be able to provide them with a more comprehensive answer, because when I was first asked, I didn't know anything about it. But a lot of truck drivers listen to true crime podcasts and as they're driving and so forth, and so I found that it seemed like there was something there that had happened and that Ted Bundy had something to do with it. So I just started looking into it on my own, probably about 9 years ago.
And for those who may be unfamiliar with Ted Bundy or maybe need a refresher, can you tell us a little bit more about him?
Well, obviously, Mr. Bundy was a notorious serial killer. He preyed upon younger females, primarily Caucasian females with longer, dark hair. He had particular preferences with victim selection in terms of how they parted their hair and age range and so forth. But there have been many case studies on Mr. Bundy and books written about him and so forth. But I think what's interesting about him was that for most of his incarceration, he maintained that he was innocent. And I think he had a certain appeal to the public, even to people who attended his trial down in Florida, because of his looks and his manner of speaking. He was well read. He was somewhat educated. He came from a somewhat affluent background. I mean, he was not what people might consider to be your traditional serial killer who had led a hard life or had been immersed in criminal activity through their childhood or anything like that. He was really, at that time, what a lot of people would probably consider a one-off. He was really different from a lot of the other case studies that people were looking at the time of his apprehension. Obviously, Mr. Bundy did leave a large number of victims in his wake, many of whom he never discussed, and those that he did discuss, he didn't go into any detail about until shortly before his execution, and this happens to be one of those cases.
So prior to Bundy's execution, he participated in a series of death row confession tapes, and our Jane Doe was mentioned on one of them. Is that right?
That's right. A lot of people may not know this, but prior to Mr. Bundy's execution on January 24th, 89, he participated in what I would call a marathon confession sit-down with a number of investigators from different states. I don't know if this was to clear his conscience or what he had in mind, but he did confess to a number of homicides, some that were known, some were unknown. And the background on that is that Mr. Bundy was assisting FBI investigators with the Green River murder investigation, Gary Ridgway, from about 86 to 89. And at some point during that period, Mr. Bundy elected to give a full confession regarding various victims, some whose names he was able to remember regarding his own exploits. So Bob Keppel was the chief investigator for the AG's office in Washington at that time, and it was decided that Bob would be selected to do most of the interviewing with Mr. Bundy so that investigators weren't running in different directions, and he could develop a solid rapport with Mr. Bundy and so forth. So most of Mr. Bundy's unsolved murders were believed to have been committed in Washington, so that was another reason Bob was selected. And when Bundy was scheduled to be executed in January of 89, he told Bob Keppel on or about January 18th that there was also 2 Idaho murders that he committed during the 1970s. So what Bob did was he got a hold of the Idaho Attorney General's office, and it was decided that a group of investigators would fly out to Florida and that they would interview Mr. Bundy on January 22nd. So less than 2 days before he was executed. And that interview was set to begin at a particular time, and there were certain conditions that were made by way of the FBI and Bundy's attorneys and so forth. But basically it came down to they had roughly 60 minutes to conduct an interview and move out of the way for the next investigator to interview Mr. Bundy about the next case that he wished to confess to. So that's why I call it kind of a marathon confession that took place during those final hours of Mr. Bundy's life.
So have you been able to listen to those confession tapes?
So I did have a chance to listen to the audio tapes, and I felt they were more detailed than the transcripts to some degree. And it was just helpful hearing it from Bundy himself and his tone, inflection, and timbre and so forth in response to a lot of the questions.
And what information did you learn about our Jane Doe from listening to those tapes?
Well, a lot of the things that Mr. Bundy said seemed to fit as far as the geography went, the area that he was discussing, because this is a case involving who we would call a Jane Doe, somebody we don't know her name, we don't know the victim's name. I couldn't necessarily refute some of the details Mr. Bundy provided about her. So there was cause for concern, and certainly it seemed like something that we most definitely needed to investigate. When I found out later that some of what I at first thought were discrepancies in Mr. Bundy's statement might not be, that is to say, some of the markers along the highway and so forth that he was referring to that I had no knowledge of because I work out there all the time. I'm thinking, what is he talking about? When I found out later that the highway was under construction during the time that Mr. Bundy was referring to, and that in fact these markers had existed, that really brought about further concern. And then when I looked into some of the other confessions that Bundy had given, and what was in some of that information and how that had come to fruition and produced closed cases, I came to realize that our Jane Doe case might be one of the last ones that had not been dissolved, and it's kind of interesting to think about. But of all the confessions Bundy gave, with so many of them proving to be accurate, I really don't have any cause to think that he decided to lie about this one. And so where we are with it right now is that I do treat his confession as credible, and I think the information that he provided, for the most part, if not wholly, can be deemed reliable, at least in terms of the geography and the benchmarks and so forth that he provided. What we're down to now is just trying to determine who was she, who is our Jane Doe. We have a brief description provided by Mr. Bundy.
It was early evening, as I recall. Anyway, I pulled over, and my car was full of stuff, and she was carrying a large green backpack. She looked to be about 16 to 18. Light brown hair, about 5'6". I don't know them. I didn't know her name. A bead necklace, an old a simple little bead necklace. That's all I can recall. What color it was? Well, I'm not very good at describing jewelry, and bead doesn't really describe the kinds of whatever it was. They were more like long little sections of spaghetti with a string set through it, and they were black and a lighter color.
Some sparse details that he was able to recall about things she said.
What her ultimate destination was?
There was a recollection. It was somewhere in Montana. But that's just very vague.
Did you have the impression that she was a runaway, or that,
Go ahead.
or that she was just traveling on her own?
I got the impression that she was leaving home, and that she was probably leaving, that the boys' area was probably the area that she was leaving.
Mr. Bundy spent a lot of the time mostly just being responsive to the questions he was being asked. Now, mind you, the investigators were there to discuss another case as well. So with that limited amount of time that they had, they did spend a lot of time discussing the case of Lynette Culver. She was 12 years old. She'd been abducted and murdered by Mr. Bundy in Pocatello. The details that Mr. Bundy provided regarding that case, while not leading to Lynette's remains, did lead to a closure in that case, wherein investigators were able to determine that Mr. Bundy was the perpetrator. And he knew things about Lynette that only she could have told him. And so, as well as other details. So, it begs the question, why would he lie about our Jane Doe case and then tell the truth about Lynette Culver? And that's why I wanted to listen to his voice and see, is there any deviation in the baseline of his tone and timbre as he's discussing Lynette? And there's not. At least my experience tells me there's not. He's very consistent, very fluid, without reservation. He speaks on both cases. And that's one thing that I come back to when I think about this case, and because we are investing time into it, and I want to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. I think what he's had to say about Jane is credible, and a lot of that has been that we have from the audio is her description, and again, what sparse details that he could recall that she said. He thought she was from Boise, from Ada County, that she was maybe trying to get to Montana. He estimated her age to be younger, maybe not even 18 yet. He provided a clothing description and description of her. Mr. Bundy indicated that he was traveling eastbound on Interstate 84 in what he believed to be Ada County, or the Boise area, on the outskirts, it sounded like, from what he said, of Boise, when he first encountered our Jane, who was appeared to be hitchhiking or standing alongside the highway as if she needed a ride.
I picked up a young woman who was hitchhiking, traveling. Well, I was traveling east at the time. She was standing down. It wasn't a downtown off-ramp, on-ramp, but it was further out of the city. It seems like there were like ranch-style suburban houses within view of the off-ramp.
He pulled over and offered her a ride, which she accepted, and she got into his notorious yellow Volkswagen Beetle, and away they went eastbound on I-84. Based on the description that Mr. Bundy provided, and this isn't 100%, but we have to go off of what details we have. I've looked at old maps, old photos of the interstate from that era, and have tried as diligently as I can to form an idea of where she was picked up. And I think the closest that I've been able to get to is possibly in the vicinity of eastbound 84 at Eisenman Road, in that area. This is on the outskirts of Boise. There were, and still are, in fact, some ranch-style homes that are visible from that particular exit. And this would not have been the case at many of our other exits that would have been considered outskirts, like Vista or Broadway or what have you. So that seems to fit very closely. But again, it's not for sure. But this may be where he picked up Jane Doe.
It sounds like his confessions have come under quite a bit of scrutiny. Do you believe that this confession is reliable?
I do. I do believe it's reliable, and I understand why his confessions may come under scrutiny, or may have in the past. I think it's likely because some felt that Bundy was lying to get a stay of execution at that time. The problem with that is the governor of Florida was publicly adamant that no stay would be given in the weeks leading up to Bundy's execution date, which is actually, I think, what prompted Mr. Bundy to talk about these unsolved cases, as he stated he wanted to absolve himself of sin before his death. So I had read one comment somewhere where somebody told him that the Florida governor had said something about even if he was able to bring his victims back from the dead, they'd still intended to execute him. So there was no chance that Bundy was going to get out of this, and I think he knew that, and I think you see some sense of that when you see some of his final interview material. The other problem is the confessions that Bundy made to investigators from around the country during his final days have legitimately assisted in other victims being identified. We're not the only jurisdiction to have a Bundy victim still outstanding. One set of remains was identified by detectives in Utah as recently as 2019, kind of a very similar situation where they're going off a Bundy confession as our office is, and they're trying to figure things out like we are, and they end up closing the case. So in that case, those remains belong to 17-year-old Deborah Kent, a victim Bundy confessed to killing during an interview given, I believe, the same afternoon as he spoke with our Idaho investigators. So he talked about that case, abducting this young lady, raping her, murdering her, and he provided the description as to where to look for her body. And so using this information, Utah investigators, I'm told, were eventually able to locate Deborah and he murdered her just 2 months after our Jane Doe. So the situation with the Utah investigators has been similar to our situation right now, and that just gives me further, cause to want to see this through. And I don't think there's any harm in our office doing what we can to at least identify Jane and look for her.
Well, I mean, obviously, we have a girl here who, she has a family out there somewhere. She has friends out there somewhere, and it doesn't really matter how much time has passed. She still deserves that justice, and to be given a name. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously, you're not just going to take what he says at face value. What steps have you taken in your investigation to essentially corroborate what he is saying?
Well, I want to point out to date, I'm not aware of any proof that's ever been provided that Bundy lied about anything in his final confessions. He certainly didn't lie about the other Idaho victim, 12-year-old Lynette Culver. And so his statement and knowledge of Lynette led to, they were so compelling that Pocatello investigators notified her family that Bundy killed her, even though her body has not been discovered that I'm aware of. So the steps that I'm currently taking are just a deep dive analysis as best as I can make with our partners here at the Sheriff's Office into what Mr. Bundy said, what he didn't say, and how we can use that information in conjunction with what we have here in the form of microfilm reels, old missing persons reports, old witness statements from other crimes, runaway reports, and so forth. And what we're doing right now, an appeal to the public to try to find out, does anyone know anything about a young lady who may have disappeared around that time? We're going to throw everything we can at this to try to figure out who Jane was. Because again, you asked me, do I think it was credible what he said? Yes, I do. And I'm going to treat it that way until there's cause not to. And as of this time, with every stone we've kicked over, I haven't found that bit of information to slow things down and say, oh, wait a minute, this might just all be fake. In fact, the benchmarks that he provided, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on those because I don't think that's a responsible approach, having people go look for this site. It's a rather dangerous, treacherous area of the Snake River, or can be at certain times a year.
And it's private property, right?
It's private property, and I've met with the folks out there, and I know that they intend to make sure people know it's private property if they should step foot out there. So,
well, and I think it's also worth noting too, like, our own dive team has gone out for training days, several days out there. We're working with a team of experts to talk about that site and what it could look like in the future, to do a more thorough search. So we are taking that site into consideration.
Oh yeah, I mean it's not just me walking around out there with with a magnifying glass and looking around. We've had sonar experts out there. We've had experts from other areas that I won't dive in too deep on, but they have helped us. PhDs out there helping us formulate an idea of what the area looked like back then versus how it may have changed, the morphology that we have today. We've had, as you mentioned, our dive team has been out there on multiple occasions. This isn't just like, hey, let's go out for a half hour and dive or something. We've had our boats and our teams out there, until the sun's going down. I would say thus far it has been a very thorough search, and what we've come away with from all of this information gathering is that we have a lot of data points that we didn't have when we first started, and that it will have to continue to be a very thorough search probably until we're confident that we have found her, or that we're not able to, given the circumstances. But we're not there yet, and we're going to keep looking for right now.
So, as we're kind of coming to the end of this episode, I want to go back to that September 2nd, 1974 time frame. What have you found throughout the course of your investigation to place Bundy in the Boise area?
Well, Bundy also confessed to an attempted abduction of a Pocatello college student that he saw while he was out trolling, is how he phrased it. That report was discovered in Pocatello, and her report was later determined to be, as I say, on file. So she had indeed come forward to discuss her near fatal abduction with a man in a yellow Volkswagen. We have found a similar report taken from around the same date that Bundy was believed to be in Boise. Per his own gas receipts, he was here September 2nd, 1974. In that report, I'll just say, without commenting too much, is very similar. It involves an attempted abduction of a woman. He's pretending to be a police officer. This was one of the many ruses that Bundy used in other cases. He used it down in Utah. One of the few survivors of anyone who ever had occasion to meet Bundy in that fashion still tells the story today in graphic detail of his presenting a badge and saying he was a police detective and so forth. So we're very concerned about that report, and we're looking into that a little bit more.
And to be clear, we don't know for sure that that was Ted Bundy. We just think that the timing is a little bit suspicious.
Right, yeah. I think the timing's a little bit suspicious. I can say in the last 10 years or so that I've been here at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, and in the 12 years or so before that I was a police officer, I don't ever remember taking a report regarding an attempted abduction where a man pretended to be a police officer. So the fact that such a case occurred on or about the day that Bundy was here in Boise is very concerning to us, especially knowing that, as with Lynette and Pocatello, he attempted the same thing with this other individual. So.
And you mentioned his gas receipts, so you were able to place him in Boise on that time frame based on his gas receipts?
That's correct. As I mentioned, we have resources that we pull from to get information, and a lot of that involves our brothers and sisters at other agencies around the country, especially the western states. In speaking with other investigators and private investigators and so forth, we obtain these receipts, and what they tell us is that Bundy was here on Monday, September 2nd, 74, where he stopped off at a gas station near the airport, and he got gas. We also know from a statement provided by Bundy's former girlfriend that he had called her from Nampa on that day. He didn't get gas in Nampa, and I guess he was just driving around in Nampa, but he got gas afterward here in Boise, and we know that he stuck around, or perhaps came back the following day. We know that he was in Burley. And we know later in the month of September, he again returned to Boise and Burley. And we have him back in our area yet again in 75, a couple of times. So he was familiar with this area, and he even says in his confession, that he had kind of scouted out, or at least alluded to that possibility. Different terrain out here.
In his confession, did he give that September 2nd date or time frame?
He didn't give the specific date, but he knew that it was around that time.
In approximately early September 1974, I was driving from Seattle to Salt Lake City. Actually, I was moving my belongings from Seattle to Salt Lake City anyway.
He kind of knew the rough timeline to give investigators an idea of where to look for missing persons reports and so forth. So, he was trying to be helpful, I think, and he was being honest about that. And there again, you can now take a piece of physical evidence, a gas receipt, and marry it up to part of his statement, and it fits just perfectly.
And we don't have any females in the missing person database that match this time frame or anything like that.
Right, and that's a problem that a lot of people may not know this, but NCIC, the system that we use, the national database for running people for warrants and so forth, that didn't come online until way decades ago. we were still integrating these kinds of systems into police departments and sheriff's offices and central dispatch centers at that time. The missing unidentified persons system didn't come online until after this event, and backdating wasn't something that was being done with most offices, I'm told, from people who worked back then. I've done some interviews. And so what you end up with is a great number of missing persons reports or runaway reports that weren't entered in because they either couldn't be or because a process was not put in place for backlogging them, or if there was, a lot of people weren't trained on that. And so being that, until the mid-'70s, early '80s, it wasn't as streamlined as it is now. Someone runs away, we get them entered in. Someone's missing, we get them put in MUPs. This happened again September 2nd, '74. I think we're dealing with a victim whose name is not out there, unless you're probably not going to find them on any of the public sites like the Doe Network or the Charlie Project or NamUs or any of those. This is probably somebody who's yet to be discovered somewhere deep in our 1,400 and something microfilm reels, and that's what we're painstakingly searching through now. We're aiming to find her.
Which is a good point. I mean, we're talking about a case from 1974. Fast forward now, you're a detective in 2024. What does looking through those reports look like for you?
So it was a much more tedious process. A microfilm reel is, it's like the old library newspaper archives. You're turning it, you're looking through each slide. I was averaging about 9.5 hours per reel. And again, we have over 1,400 reels here. Now, they're indexed in such a way that I was able to get into general time frames. So, but I might have, a dozen or more reels to look through just from that have reports from September 2nd. So thankfully, this office has taken the initiative to start digitizing all of those reels, and I'm told that we're about halfway through that process now, with not very long to go before we'll have them all digitized. I have access to what has been digitized, so I'm able to speed that process up on my downtime when I have time of going through these reels at a much faster pace now, and I would say at least 10 times faster. So I've been getting through them, and that's how we found the one report of the attempted abduction. So I think we're making some headway, and I'm encouraged to think about what the future brings as far as that process goes.
And obviously that's if a missing person report, if a runaway report was filed on our Jane Doe's behalf in our jurisdiction, because who's to say she didn't come from Canyon County or a surrounding area, Meridian Police Department, something like that.
That's a wonderful point. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is so true. I mean, if you think about the mentality of a runaway, I mean, they're running away from home, they're trying to get away. They may have a friend's house they go stay at, or another relative who doesn't tell mom and dad that they're staying there, because who knows what their background looks like or what they're running away from. Maybe it's a situation that they need to get out of, or maybe it's a situation that families trying to get them the resources without putting them back in a dangerous position or whatever. We don't know. And so, yeah, was she from Canyon County? Was she from Oregon? Did she stay here in Boise, and that's why he got that impression? Was she from Boise, the Ada County region? We don't know 100%, but we are looking through those old reports. But it is our appeal to the listeners, is that, yeah, if you know of somebody who disappeared around that time, who ran away, that you never heard from again, a sister or a cousin or a friend. Again, the date was September 2nd, '74 that he picked her up, but could she have been missing already for a few weeks, had run away a month earlier? We don't know. So if anything about the description that Mr. Bundy provided that your viewers or your listeners have heard resonates, if these dates resonate, please contact me. I mean, I would love to know more about what you remember, or what you have to say, because I think this is one of those cases where we're 50 years down the road, where the public is going to be hopefully a big part in solving this.
Thank you for listening. We remain committed to finding answers and bringing justice to cold cases in Ada County, no matter how much time has passed. If you have any information that may help us identify our Jane Doe, please call 208-577-3102.